I'm General Dan Graham, and I am the project director of High Frontier. High Frontier is the result of the efforts of over a score of the best scientists, engineers, economists, and management specialists that we could muster. The results of High Frontier are to be found in this book, and the principal results are that we are able to move from the old strategy of mutual assured destruction, which denied the United States the ability to protect itself, and to do it while at the same time opening up space so that we can tap the enormous economic potential of space. This is my family, my wife, 7 children, and 1 of my 6 grandchildren. The most important thing about High Frontier to me is that they will be able to live in a United States which is secure and without the brooding menace of nuclear destruction. Now, some time ago, we went public with High Frontier, and we were happy to find that we got a very good response from the press, from the Washington Post, the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, and others. But there was one journalist who summed up High Frontier, I think, better than any of the others, and I'd like you to see what he had to say.
High Frontier promises to be the critical strategic, diplomatic, technological, and even philosophical issue of the decade.
After you have seen this program, I think you're going to agree with Mr. David Wilson of the Boston Globe and agree with me that High Frontier is a strategy that should be adopted by the United States, and that all we require is the political will to do so. And I hope you're sufficiently convinced that you're willing to do something about it.
The space shuttle has ushered in a new era for mankind. The Columbia not only carries men into space, it brings them back again and lands them at their precise destination on Earth. This is a development more momentous for the future than the flight of the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. The shuttle actually gives us a railroad into space. We can now move men and materials into the High Frontier to open broad new fields of human endeavor. Whether America moves quickly into this frontier may well determine our future as a nation and the future of the entire free world. Today, we are at the point Europe was at just after the voyages of Christopher Columbus. His discovery and exploration of the New World opened a tremendous surge of activity on the high seas. First Spain and Portugal, and then France and Holland and England used the seas to enrich their economies, protect their countries, and spread Western civilization to the Americas. These nations were propelled by an historic imperative, just as we are today. We have reached a decisive moment. It is up to us to seize that moment, to capitalize on our already substantial investment in space. For some 20 years, since the creation of NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the United States has de-emphasized the military role in space. Yet it was the military who got us into space to begin with. America's first satellite, the Explorer 1, was a military project. So, in a development sense, was Mercury, which carried the first American, Commander Alan Shepard, into space, and less than a year later put Colonel John Glenn into orbit. In the late 1950s, General Arthur Trudeau was Chief of Research and Development for the Department of the Army. Under his command was the Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, with Werner von Braun and his brilliant team of space scientists. General Trudeau wrote a memorandum back during the Eisenhower administration recommending that we put men on the moon. He said we could do it within 5 to 6 years. The Titan missile, developed for the Air Force by a team headed by General Bernard Schriever, was the booster that made it possible for us to land Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin on the moon in 1969. In between General Trudeau's prophetic recommendation and our actual landing on the moon, the military role in space was sidetracked. In the early 1960s, we virtually demilitarized our space effort, and it remains demilitarized to this day. By contrast, the Soviet Union has never drawn any distinction whatever between its civilian and military space programs. The entire Soviet space effort is directed by a separate branch of their armed services known as the Strategic Rocket Forces. The whole Soviet effort in space is clearly aimed at giving the USSR military dominance over the United States, indeed, over the whole world. Here is the general who presides over the Soviet space program, with the scientists who assist him. There is no doubt who is in command here. Vladimir Shatilov is a former cosmonaut. A Soviet interpreter tells us what General Shatilov is saying.
The outstanding Russian scientist, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, predicted that space exploration would bring mankind plenty of food and immense power. And now we are coming to appreciate this prediction more and more.
The Soviets have done some remarkable things in space, things that have great military potential. For several years, they have been keeping teams of cosmonauts almost constantly in solid orbital complexes. They commute to and from these satellites in Soyuz rockets, docking routinely with a Salyut. By way of propagandizing the ersatz international character of their space program, the Soviets have taken a Cuban, a German, a Romanian, and a Pole in their rockets, under Soviet command, of course. Even Fidel Castro was introduced by Leonid Brezhnev to a Soviet satellite. In spite of Soviet advances in space, they still lag behind the United States in many respects. Their space vehicles cannot land of their own accord. They bring them down with huge parachutes, contrasted with the pinpoint precision landings made by the American space shuttle. In some ways, their instrumentation and equipment is quite primitive as compared with ours. But their space vehicles undoubtedly serve Soviet military purposes very well indeed. Moreover, we know the Soviets have orbited nuclear reactors in space. Here's what happened when one of them came down in Canada.
The debris recovered on Great Slave Lake is intriguing to scientists. The composition of metals could tell them more about Soviet satellite construction. Of the two pieces returned to Yellowknife last night, one is radioactive.
Today, the scientific and Armed Forces ground team headed back to Great Slave Lake. They've isolated a football-sized satellite fragment that is highly radioactive.
There's no doubt the Soviets are going all out to win military control of space. What can America do to offset this threat? We'll take a closer look at High Frontier's plan right after this announcement.
Yes, threat from space is very real. If you wish to help prevent the Soviets' domination of space, we need your help now. High Frontier is a private organization that must depend upon your contributions to get its program to the public. If you want to see the United States acquire a non-nuclear defense in space, call this toll-free number or send your tax-deductible contribution to High Frontier, 1010 Vermont Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20005. Every contribution of $25 or more will receive a copy of the High Frontier Report, the same report sent to President Reagan for his consideration. Remember, if you want to see High Frontier's concept become a reality, send us a check for $25, $100, $1,000 or more. Ask yourself, how much is the defense of your country worth to you?
The policy of mutual assured destruction, which bears the appropriate acronym MAD, has paralyzed United States strategic thought for 2 decades. In recent years, the decline in U.S. military strength and a continuing Soviet military buildup have called into question our ability to survive and respond to a Soviet first strike. It is time for a bold new stroke in strategic planning. High Frontier addresses this need by proposing a triple-layered non-nuclear defense. The system consists of 3 elements deployed in sequential zones. The first is a global ballistic missile defense, a low Earth orbit network of space trucks or carrier vehicles that deploy clusters of small non-nuclear interceptors capable of neutralizing enemy ICBMs during the initial boost phase. A second level defense catches most of the missiles that get through the first layer. Finally, a ground-based point defense system is designed to enhance survivability of our existing Minuteman forces. Separately and together as an integrated system, each element of this defensive plan acts to increase U.S. ability to survive and respond to a Soviet first strike. They form a credible deterrent to Soviet military planners who may advocate a first strike policy. Let's examine each element of the high frontier proposal. At the heart of the plan is a network of small space trucks or carrier vehicles in highly inclined 300-mile orbits. Each truck is capable of deploying numerous small heat-seeking interceptor missiles in an expanding sphere along its orbital track. Overlapping orbital tracks provide continuous coverage. Here is a possible intercept scenario. At launch, a Soviet ICBM rises almost vertically, then pitches over, more nearly following the Earth's curvature as it gains speed and altitude. Above the horizon, sensors can easily detect heat from the missile's exhaust against the cold background of space. Targeting computers select the appropriately positioned carrier satellite. Several interceptors are deployed and fan out as they accelerate along the orbital track. Sensors home in on the target exhaust. A conventional non-nuclear warhead disables the enemy missile during the first 7 minutes of its boost phase and prior to deployment of its multiple nuclear warheads. Much of the technology for such a system already exists. Given committed development resources, the system could be launched, deployed, and serviced by the space shuttle within 5 to 6 years at a cost of approximately $15 billion, a fraction of our overall defense budget. The second level will incorporate the global ballistic missile defense and more advanced systems that may require further technological development. This level would offer the advantage of extremely rapid targeting after deployment of the enemy's multiple warhead payloads. It would be designed to disable targets above the atmosphere. Should any enemy warheads pass through the first and second defense zones, a third level of ground-based point defense installations will protect our Minuteman silos or other targets in the U.S. This defense system operates at short range with a very high-velocity salvo of small ballistic rockets. One such device, the Swarmjet, is already under development. Swarmjet, or other devices like it, could be deployed immediately and at relatively low cost. This would complicate an attacker's targeting problems and thereby enhance our deterrent capability. Let's look at an engagement involving the entire system. The overlay shows the intercept coverage of a single truck as it passes over the Soviet Union on an orbit inclined 65 degrees to the equator. Other trucks, spaced 20 degrees apart along the orbital track, pass over the target region every 3 or 4 minutes. Still more carrier satellites on slightly different orbits provide blanket coverage over any desired region. When our reconnaissance systems verify a Soviet launch, U.S. interceptors are fired as Level 1 defense goes into action. The second level of defense pinpoints and disables most remaining enemy targets above the atmosphere. But several warheads are entering the atmosphere on trajectories that would strike the Midwestern United States. At a U.S. Minuteman silo, fire control radar acquires the missile track and launches a Swarmjet barrage at the incoming warhead, destroying it at a distance sufficient to protect our Minuteman, even if the attacking warhead detonates. It should be emphasized that no defense is perfect. Its purpose is to delay, deter, and make more difficult the attacker's position. The global ballistic missile defense and other systems described here can make the most of America's lead in space technology. The support system necessary to implement the military aspects of our spaceflight capabilities will also contribute greatly to such civilian programs as the Space Operations Center, space industry, and solar power satellites. More importantly, this new national strategy represents a break from the dangerous policy of mutual assured destruction. What we propose is not a panacea. Space-based defense does not mean that our nuclear retaliatory capability can be abandoned or neglected. But by reducing the threat of an enemy first strike, we will have less compulsion to continue amassing ever larger arsenals of nuclear weapons. This will help to produce a more stable and peaceful world than we now inhabit.
An American military capability in space is one part of High Frontier's program. The other is expansion of the peaceful uses of space. Here to tell us about one of the most promising of these uses is Dr. Peter Glaser of the Arthur D. Little Company in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Space is a limitless frontier in terms of materials and energy resources. Tapping these resources is a single most important agenda point for this civilization, probably for the next 100 years. The start that is being made in the High Frontier project by focusing not only on military, but also on the industrial potential of space is certainly well placed. We are proud of the USS Constitution anchored in Boston Harbor and still seaworthy, and recall the era of clipper ships. Industry does have to be assured that its investments will be protected. This has been a requirement throughout history. I believe that space will enable us not only to expand our means of communication, which is already a major market for satellites, as much as $25 billion by the year 2000, but also to devise new ways to process materials in space. The solar power satellite is one of the few major options capable of supplying energy on a global scale. It works by using the solar energy in geosynchronous orbit 22,300 miles away, converts it into microwaves, and then a beam is sent back to Earth. We are already starting to work on the assembly of these large space structures by means of beam builders, which are capable of constructing large structures in space automatically. The next step has to be to carry out experiments with the space shuttle so that we learn how to proceed from here. The cost of building these solar power satellites can be made competitive with other alternatives, whether they be nuclear or coal power plants. We are today convinced that it can be environmentally benign and be one of the major approaches to meeting our future energy needs.
I'm Congressman Newt Gingrich, the Republican co-chairman of the Congressional Space Caucus. The United States is at a crossroads in both its prosperity and its very survival. And the High Frontier gives us a chance to leapfrog past the huge Russian army to regain our national security through developments in space. The space shuttle gives us an opportunity to develop through the High Frontier program answers to the Russian challenge that would put us a decade ahead of the Russians in dominating the high frontier of space. You know, he who controlled the air controlled World War II. The Japanese early on in the Pacific with their carriers, the Americans later on. The Germans early on in the Blitzkrieg with their Stuka dive bombers, the Americans later on. In the future, he who controls space may well control the future of mankind. We have a chance, through the High Frontier, using existing technology, to develop a space program that is absolutely necessary to our survival and that will give us a chance to move past the Russians to assure our own nation and freedom a future on this planet.
It's what we've been trying to do for the last 10 years. We've got a vehicle with a payload performance that will allow us to do that, much cheaper than we've been able to do it before. It will immeasurably improve the defensive capability of the country. It will help develop space science and technology. When we get operational, the space shuttle will be able to do in 5 to 10 years what it would have taken us 20 to 30 years to do otherwise. We couldn't do it if we didn't have the space shuttle and that payload capability. And the sooner we do those things, the better off the country's going to be.
As astronaut Young says, this new American space capability can profoundly affect our security. In fact, if we use this new capability well, we can avoid passing on to our children and our grandchildren the sorry legacy of a balance of terror and mutual assured destruction theories, those theories which have dominated U.S. strategic thinking for nearly 20 years.
The high frontier concepts developed by General Daniel Graham and his team of consultants and advisors is attracting serious attention from space enthusiasts. One of these is author Robert Heinlein.
The thing I like best about the high frontier, two aspects of it. One is it's non-nuclear, which should quiet down the people who go straight through the roof anytime anyone mentions the word nuclear. And the other is that there is nothing about any aspect of high frontier that constitutes an attack on anyone else. It's physically impossible to use any one of the concepts in high frontier for attack, for aggression. It is, for the first time, defense. We've been sitting here in the United States, fat, dumb, and happy for 40 years, telling ourselves we had defense because we had a Department of Defense, when in fact we had no defense at all. None. We have no means of stopping an ICBM. We didn't even have proposals for means until High Frontier came along. You can't kill a single Russian with High Frontier. What you can do is save the lives of American citizens, of the citizens of Western Europe, of the people of the Third World, and of Russians themselves by quenching out a nuclear war even after the button is pushed.
April 14, 1981, a spaceship landed on planet Earth. It was ours. When most Americans learn of the high frontier strategy of assured survival, they ask, why is it not already in effect? It is because our leaders need broad public support to change national policy, because high frontier challenges those within the government bureaucracy who see a real strategy change as a threat to their vested interests, and because many Americans unfortunately prefer to cling to the vain hope that our security can best be guaranteed merely by agreements with the Soviets. The high frontier concept is based on existing technological capabilities. It is far less expensive than other methods of ensuring our security. High frontier's commercial space proposals will more than pay for the military systems. And best of all, it will relieve us of the balance of terror doctrines of the past. Some concerned Americans have already donated so that the high frontier team of scientists, engineers, and strategists could be assembled. We need your help to build public support to make high frontier a reality. Call the toll-free number with your pledge. or write to us at High Frontier, 1010 Vermont Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20005. Your donations are tax deductible, and every contributor of $25 or more will receive this handsome, colorfully illustrated copy of the full High Frontier report, just as President Reagan received. Join us in this crucial effort.